We officially finished our preseason preparations with 2 games against the Italian side Como on the same day. The first game was behind closed doors, and let us be honest, based on a lot of people's reactions, we are probably glad that we missed that one. Now it makes more sense why that game was not particularly exciting, because it was mainly an opportunity for players like Endo, McAllister, and some of the youngsters to get minutes under their legs and build up their fitness ahead of the new season. The second game, however, took place later that same day and featured most of its big guns from the start. That could give us a good hint about what the starting lineup against Newcastle might look like in our first game back. We eventually won 2-0, and while the scoreline might suggest that we had a comfortable game, the reality was a little different. There were some really positive things to take from the match, but there were also a few worrying signs that we should probably keep an eye on going into the start of the season. So if you want to know what happened in the game and what we learnt from it, then hit that like and subscribe button and let's jump straight into it. Now, you heard us mention some worrying signs, so let us start with them. The first one is the high press. Before we get into the details though, let us explain a few things. An Iraola side is known for being excellent out of possession, with his high press being one of his biggest strengths. His Bournemouth side were particularly good at taking away what other teams wanted to do, not just by working hard, but by being clever with their positioning and knowing exactly when to jump and press. That is something we should expect to see at Liverpool as well. The idea will be to dominate teams without the ball, using intensity and hard work, but also good positioning, coordinated movements, and well-timed jumps. It's not simply about running towards the ball. The players need to understand what the opponent is trying to do, position themselves accordingly, and then know when to step out and apply pressure. Now, during this preseason, the hard work was not really an issue. The physical levels were, however, especially because some players struggle to maintain the same intensity throughout certain games. That is something that we should naturally improve as they get more minutes and their fitness levels increase. The more interesting part for me is the positioning and the timing of those jumps. That is something that will depend much more on the players themselves and how quickly they can process what the new manager wants from them. They need to recognize the right triggers, understand when to hold their position and when to jump, while also making sure they do not leave spaces in behind them. And we saw a few examples of this against Como, so let's take a look at them. Here you can see Como building up with practically 7 players in deep areas if we count the goalkeeper. They had both fullbacks deep, the centre-backs positioned wide, and 2 pivot players also dropping deep. For us, you can see just 4 players near the opponent's box. Now, do numbers really matter here? Should we simply go man-to-man and match their build-up with the same number of players? Well, not necessarily. If we go man-to-man all over the pitch, we can leave ourselves vulnerable to rotations and players moving off of the ball. Instead, what we did here was force the play into one area and then go man-to-man in that specific zone. Isak curves his pressing run to lock the play onto Como's left side. The pass into the left centre-back then becomes the trigger to jump and put pressure on the ball, with Nugama jumping onto the left back and Gravenberch supporting the press by pushing higher. The idea itself is good. We are basically saying to Como, you can play here, but we are going to make this area as difficult as possible for you. This is where, however, some mistakes start to take place. First, for Rio, the pressing run itself was good and he decelerated at the right time. However, if the intention was to force play wide, he would have curved his run slightly differently and approached from the inside. That would allow him to block the pass back inside while still putting pressure on the centre-back and forcing him towards the fullback. Now, if he was instructed to force play back inside and set a trap there, then we cannot really blame him from approaching the way he did. The important thing is that the intention behind the press needs to be clear. The second mistake comes from Gravenberch. He should have prioritized defending the central space instead of jumping to cover Wirtz's man. By doing that, he left a bigger gap through the middle that Como could potentially exploit. The third mistake comes from Szoboszlai, who loses his man and allows him to receive between the lines. Once that happens, the structure of the press starts to fall apart because Como have a player receiving in an area where we really do not want them to. As a result, a first-time diagonal pass from the left back is enough for Como to find the free man. This forces Jacket to jump into midfield, which then allows them to feed the striker out wide. Thankfully, we had Frimpong, who seems to be willing to accept every foot race he gets offered. He gets across quickly enough to deal with the danger and prevent the situation from becoming even more problematic. So the issue here is not really that we had fewer players than Como in the build-up. The idea was actually quite smart. The problem was that once we decided where we wanted to press, every player needed to understand his role and protect the spaces around him. One player jumping at the wrong time or another leaving his man can be enough to open up the entire structure. In a different instance, you can see us sitting in a 4-4-2 mid-block, trying to deny Como the chance to play through us. Here you can see Xhaka communicating with Frimpong and asking him to push higher while he takes charge of the wide area. However, Gravenberch, who had pushed higher up the pitch, did not get this piece of information. Earlier in the sequence, he scanned behind him and saw that Xhaka was covering the space for him. So when his player started moving behind him, he trusted what he had seen before and did not check again. That second scan was important because the picture had changed. Xhaka had now moved across to deal with the wide player, meaning Gravenberch could no longer rely on him to cover the space in behind. Because he did not recognize the change, he allowed his man to move into the space behind him without reacting. That small lapse was enough for Xhaka to find the pass through the middle. This is exactly where communication and scanning becomes so important in a defensive structure. It is not enough to scan once and assume the picture will stay the same. As the ball and your teammates move, the picture changes and you have to keep updating the information you are working with. Now, unfortunately, this happened at least 2 more times, which shows that we still have a lot of work to do with the players so they can understand exactly what they need to do and especially learn to communicate better with each other. But does that mean we had a horrible game out of possession? Of course not. In fact, we saw how effective we can be at creating danger without the ball. Here you can see the same concept of Isak pressing to lock the play onto Como's left side, and we successfully set the trap. Rio pushed forward with Frimpong backing up the press behind him, which forces the pass back to Isak. Unfortunately though, Szoboszlai was not able to capitalize on the chance. Now for the in-possession stuff, we have to be honest. The deep build-up aspect of things was not inspiring. The main issue was the lack of movement without the ball. Look, we are not asking the team to play centrally in every sequence, but having a double pivot that cannot move smartly to receive in the first phase could prove to be an issue. Here both Gravenberch and Szoboszlai struggle to offer a passing option centrally. In this specific instance, we can understand Szoboszlai's high positioning. He is a second ball magnet, so if we go long, he would be well positioned to win the ball back. However, as the pass to Van Dijk was made, Gravenberch should have moved faster to provide a passing option between the gate. He did not, and that allowed one Como player to cover him while the other jumped onto Van Dijk. From there, the pass wide and then the long ball, which we eventually lost, were forced by Como. Now, while playing centrally might have been a problem, playing around Como's press was our strongest weapon, and we scored thanks to it. Xhaka here was proactive with his touch, taking the ball forward immediately. He then timed his pass out wide brilliantly, as the Como player was caught flat-footed, allowing Frimpong more time on the ball. As you can see, Rio was pinning their left back, while Wirtz ran in behind and dragged his marker with him. This allowed Frimpong to bomb forward, unopposed, and delivered the cross to Gakpo, who opened the scoring. Xhaka, who launched the attack, went on to score our second goal while putting in a flawless performance on and off the ball during the 45 minutes he played in a Liverpool shirt for the first time. And so we decided to analyze every action he made during this game. Now for that analysis, we'll need you to hit those like and subscribe buttons, but also hit the bell so you won't miss it. And that brings us to the end of our analysis. Overall, there were definitely some positive signs from the game, especially the way that we were able to create danger around Como's press and the work we did without the ball. At the same time, there are still things that need to improve, particularly when it comes to our pressing structure, communication, and movement during the first phase of the build-up. It is important to remember that this was only a pre-season match, and the players are still learning exactly what the new manager wants from them. Some of those issues should naturally improve as the players get more minutes together and become more comfortable with the system. The good thing is that we have already seen some clear ideas, and now it's about making them more consistent when the competitive games begin. Now, do let us know your thoughts down there in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this analysis, then do consider hitting the like button and subscribing for more. This is the go-to place for match breakdowns, player breakdowns going into the 2026-2020 season. I have a feeling we are going to be extremely busy. And until next time,